first time hosting here. Oh, don't block the cloud. Okay. All right. So thank you for coming tonight. Definitely really thankful that this is actually a pretty good crowd. So before we actually move on to Arvind and also Wyhow speaking on their respective topics, we would actually like to update you guys on activities we'll be doing in the next few months as well. So before that, I would actually also want to mention like the branding of GDG Cloud Kuala Lumpur, because previously there's a lot of confusion here, how we introduce, how we actually like talked about how we introduce ourselves, like is it GDG, is it GG or whatever? I don't know. But all right, so right now Google tell us that all right, sure, just to avoid confusion, right now it's GG Cloud Kuala Lumpur. All right, so remember this, take follow, it's us. All right, not like GG Cloud or whatever. Right. This is our like new branding for Google Developer Group Cloud Kuala Lumpur. So you may also ask, oh, what about GG? That's Google Developer. It's much more general. So there's also GBG as well, Business Group. So actually the cloud one. So moving on, we'll have some like technical updates on like GCP. So I think I'll pass to Huayu and also Osama to talk about what are the GCP updates for this month as well. All right. Cool. I'm thinking which one to prioritize. Okay. Hello. Okay, so where's the slide? Okay, this is a session we were doing for every meetup, every Google Cloud meetup. So there will be a session called This Month in GCP. So this session basically we will update what's happening in for Google Cloud and also for this community. And first thing I want to introduce is like this thing is introduced by Google Cloud in July, end of July. So it's a new integrations for what is tool at AI platforms. So AI platform has been out for quite some time, and they just announced that you can now use one tool and you can integrate with some other things, some new stuff out there. So this is a guide for those, especially for those software engineer who want to do machine learning but don't want to touch any kind of math. So this is a guide came up from Google AI. So from you can go to the link. There's a link there, bit.ly GCP AOG 2. So this is the GitHub link. There's some PDF files you can read through it, and this is basically a guide for you, especially very useful for software engineers who want to do machine learning without touching.
So this is also a new guide for GCP. In GCP, you can choose whether like you want it to be managed by Google. Oh, can you come back? Yeah, you either can choose like you wanna your database to be managed by Google, or you can run your database with a trust function that's managed by Google. And this is the guide for those who wanna like for example maintain a community to our and or wanna deploy IBM DB2. Yes, and for those who use BigQuery, now there is a feature that makes you define user-defined functions either by SQL language or like by JavaScript language. You can define these functions inside the library and share this library with your teammates or something.
So now you can do automatic detection on BigQuery ML. So basically, it is a thing. Read more about it in the link.
Now, GCP supports VMware. So whether you want to deploy container-based workloads or VM workloads, you can run it directly on GCP. This is it basically. We have a new code about data engineering. Anyone wanna do some data stuff, and basically they will teach you how to do queries, for example, big table or something that you can query petabytes of data inside and basically with this course.
Okay. Okay. So in 2019 April, not 12 functions has been out, not 12 is out, and now Google Cloud Run now supports Node.js functions on it.
So this is a very interesting thing. There is a company called Luma. Luma, I think it's the one that's responsible for rendering scenes in Spider-Man from Far From Home. There's no spoiler alert. Anyways, yeah. So they use a compute engine with 96 cores, 15,000 virtual CPUs. Yeah. And 128 gigabytes of RAM. This makes them able to render the monster something scene. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the fire and also the wind cloud kind of monster in a movie.
It's a very complicated scene, I guess so. And yeah, they managed to render all of it in 90 minutes rather than 8 hours. So this is amazing, basically. Yeah.
Although like now Spider-Man is out of MCU already. So okay, now Google Cloud has some certification. As you know, there's like Google Cloud Architect certification and so on and so forth. So last month they has now they have a new certifications. We call it Professional Data Engineer certification. So if you are a data engineer, you want to get certified for your skills. If you have already done something on Google Cloud, you can go for these certifications. Maybe you might think that you are not good enough to get certification yet, but go to this link, actually some guides and some useful resources for you to get started, and point you to some resources that you can get better at data engineering on Google Cloud. Then you can go for the certifications. Okay. Last month we have done the study jam at ATO. So basically, there's amazing day, like 30 something students come at the morning of Saturday, and they learn about some data, machine learning, and AI stuff on Quick Lab. If you have been any of our study jam, you know about it. So we just want to share with you guys that we are not studying. We are for the next few months we will be doing more and more study jam like this. So showing some photos. So this is a very cool stuff. A very cool place in FPO. Not promoting FPO because I'm not from FPO, but so I'm just showing some photos. Okay, so doing all this stuff, we also we are collaborating with FPO Student Developer Society, and now, as you might already know, Google now has started some Google Developer Student Club in almost every major university in Malaysia, in all around the world, and Malaysia and FPO is one of them. And I think it's like more than 2 leads, DSC Google leads in this room, I think. So next month, we will have another study jam at FPO as well. So the link to register will be up very soon, maybe next day, hopefully. Yeah, so hope to see you there. So let's welcome our first speaker, Arvind Naidu. He is a site reliable engineer at ServiceRocket.
Just want to give out kudos to these guys. They're doing a very amazing job. Do I need this too? Yep. Okay. Yeah. Can you hold this? They don't know how to use things. That's why everything. Command 1. Right. Jesse.
So she's actually DSC for UM and she's DSC for NTU as well. So developers don't leave.
What do you think you are at 18 next month with Karijam?
Also good. The pizza, is it okay? What? What? Where is it? Hey, good, I can find you. Just put the stuff with me. Okay. So I haven't actually eat it yet, so yeah.
Yeah, neither do I. I hope no one spilled any pizzas on the floor. It will be a waste. So I will be giving a talk on my experience migrating a service that I built about 10 years ago. Initially when I started, I actually built it on an on-prem. It used to have servers around the world, and I had to actually liaise with a lot of data centers, right? Before I get into it, I would like to know how many of you all are actually familiar with GCP? All right. GKE? Cool. And how many of y'all in the audience have actually done migrations? Okay. Okay, that's so I would like to walk through this session. I tried to strike a balance between getting too technical and also trying to just elaborate on the concepts that I had to endure, right? So as you can see from the GIF itself, the main component for my service was primarily revolving around the DNS itself, right? So we will get into more details later, but yes, so my name is Arvind Naidu. I'm actually a site reliability engineer at ServiceRocket. Two of my guys are here today. And I'm also part-time doing consultation for Mindvalley, right? I actually spearhead the infrastructure team. So you can actually follow me on GitHub. I'm quite active there. That's my number and also my Twitter. Not too active on Twitter. I primarily just start stuff. And I'll be moving to Netflix as their performance engineer in January. So yeah. So before that, as a disclaimer, I would like you all to actually head over and actually read the cloud adoption framework by Google. It kind of pieces together a lot of how you should avoid dogmas and stigmas revolving around adoption of cloud versus private, and whether you should have hybrid clouds and whatnot, right? It's actually a very in-depth framework that Google developed, and it's actually quite cool. So yeah, my service is actually called Finch VPN. I actually run it with a few guys, and the primary reason why we needed to migrate was that we were actually incurring a lot of cost, close to about 100K USD, just hosting the service and actually routing traffic. And the primary goal behind the motivation to migrate was actually to increase the revenue, right? And to do that, we actually had to reduce the cost. And how we actually reduced the cost was that we wanted to find a way, how can we reduce the time to provision the host? Because every host costs a lot of money in a data center, right? And the one way we could actually reduce that the cost was that we want to migrate to public clouds, whereby we can actually spin up a host of our size, preferred size, because some of the hosts that we were running around the world were just sitting idle. So that was one of the reasons why we wanted to do it. Another thing was that we want to leverage growth from our statistics or our metrics from our application. We kind of realized that according to the trajectory, we will be hitting 4 million users, and if we were to associate that to the cost that we will incur, it will be a lot more, like close to about 3 times that amount. And finally, we also wanted to drive automation by using some of the tools out there, primarily Kubernetes, right? And when I say automation here, it actually means human intervention in between automations, right? And the primary motivation behind the company Finch VPN is that we want to be self-sustained as much as we can, so that we can still go about day to day with our work rather than focusing on the business itself, because it's pretty much a very well-defined business. It just connects people through VPNs, right? And yeah, so we wanted to kind of take advantage of the CNCF landscape. How many of y'all actually heard of the CNCF landscape here? Okay, that's one. Okay. So CNCF landscape, or the abbreviation for that is that it's cloud computing, cloud native computing foundation. It kind of gives you a whole overview of like how do you manage, secrets and platforms and whatever not, using any tools that's available now that's conforming to the standards, right? So this is pretty much the migration plan that we had, right? It's pretty much like a throwback. It happened a year ago, so some of the context I'm not that vivid of, but I tried to walk you through. I'll try my best to walk you through what I did, right? So we actually went through some of the understanding of what we kind of leveraged on in terms of architecture dependencies that we had, right? We had to plan our capacity because we wanted to make sure that when we migrate, we actually had enough resources over in GCP itself, right? And another concept that I like to introduce is condition consequences. I recently just learned this. It's one strategy concept, right? So you kind of navigate through the end result by understanding the conditions so that you can lead to different kind of consequences. And the kind of things that I will talk about here is called scope creep. How did we do rollbacks and roll forwards? And also the business constraints revolving around our services. And then finally, I'll go through the great migration, how we set up the clusters, the database, how do we do the migration, and how do we package our application, right? And finally, to infinity and beyond is what are we planning to do in the future, which is leveraging some of other Kubernetes concepts called cluster API and kubefed, right? Which is very important for our service, but unfortunately, it's still in an alpha form for Kubernetes. So yeah, as a throwback, right, our application is actually primarily built on PHP 7. We always made sure that our libraries and dependencies were up to date, and we were doing so with a very robust pipeline using Spinnaker. So we were hosting everything on on-prem itself, around, I think it's in Singapore, right? And pretty much what it did was it always took care of everything that we needed to make sure that our applications were up to date. The downside was that at that point in time, vSphere was too expensive. So vSphere is actually a tool used to manage hosts. So I kind of decided that we should go for Proxmox, right? But the problem was that to manage and update Proxmox was actually, I would say, a pain in the ass, unfortunately, right? So it was actually, it was becoming more and more legacy, and we could not do instance, zone, and region failures. This was important to the service. Why? Because whenever an instance was down, primarily any users who wanted to connect to that region, right, would not be able to do any kind of secure tunneling, right? So, and that kind of increases when a zone fails or a region fails, and Proxmox cannot handle that. And also one more thing was that even though we leverage a very good CI/CD automation mechanism, Spinnaker, we cannot automate the provisioning of the infrastructure because we always had to leverage any kind of data center liaison and actually ask them to provision more hosts. And moving on, we actually also had PostgreSDB running at the back. This was self-managed, whereby we manage the installation and the upgrades and the updates and whatever not that needs to go for that. And it resided in a VM. It wasn't containerized, the application was. And also, because of how Proxmox doesn't have any failure handling, the inability to control the host that the DB was residing on always caused outages. And this was important because whenever our users try to authenticate to our service, to actually get a routing mechanism available for them to the servers that they want to go to, I know that's a lot of words, but the DB is primarily concerned on authentication, right? So whenever this DB went down, we always had an outage whereby no one can authenticate, and everyone who is authenticated and actually routing the traffic through will get a disconnect or a timeout, right? And finally, right, our networking. It was a custom overlay setup that we had to do with BGP protocol, whereby we had to connect multiple different clusters running around, multiple hosts running around the data centers across the world, right? But it was a fairly easy migration that we didn't need to do because GCP primarily offers VPC peering. We also had cloud balancing, which we needed. And finally also network service tiers, which is actually a really cool tool if you're leveraging a lot on network. It provides you with cost optimization and whatnot. Right, so before we actually always move on to migrations, a very important thing to do is always step back and understand what are you trying to do, and not do too much, right? In our case, we just wanted to migrate regions that GCP supported that our on-prem was onto. So let's just say we were running on US West 2 and we needed a region that GCP supported was US West 2 too. So we ideally just coped down servers that were running on that region and we migrated them first. But later on, GCP actually made more regions available, and we are close to 10% on the on-prem and 90% on GCP right now. We also want to understand how can we reasonably size our resources. So we were migrating to Kubernetes, so we were using GKE. We wanted to know the host capacity, you know, in terms of memory and CPU usage that we needed, and we wanted to size them in a manner whereby we are efficient and not over provisioning it. And same goes to Cloud SQL too, right? So Cloud SQL was the alternative to managing our own database, and it's managed by Google itself. I'll talk more about why manage and self-manage and the differences between them later. And finally, the very important aspect was like I needed a way to remove configurations baked into the application itself, right? And this could revolve around some things like the token that needs to go into the application, also the DB endpoint and whatever not. And initially when we did this, we did it in a very simple fashion, but right now we are doing it with Consul by HashiCorp. So we kind of put in all our key value stores in there for all our configurations, and yeah, the application just reads it from it. So yeah, in terms of, you know, the condition consequences, so what would happen if we did this and what would happen if we did that, right? First thing was scope creep. We wanted to make sure that, you know, we wanted to limit some of these thoughts that we had, like why don't we just move to microservices, right? And it would make things easier to move to KRS, but that's actually a wrong understanding. You can actually migrate a monolith to GKE, right? And that's all we want to do. We didn't want to take too much of effort, and we wanted to make sure that we just moved. And also another one thing is don't be tempted by the fashionable cloud native technologies like service mesh and whatnot. We wanted to keep it simple. We went with it. We did not introduce any kind of layers on top of it until recently because we actually found a need for it. Another very interesting concept that we apply in our company too, roll back or roll forward, right? Try always never to roll back, but instead roll forward, but always make sure that you have a rollback mechanism in place, right? So we took a measure twice, cut once approach. The reason for this is because the database was a very important aspect of it. So we wanted to make sure that we kept the database, the original database, in the on-prem while we had a replication running on Cloud SQL. And I'll talk a bit more later on that. And we also did a lot of rehearsal on the migrations, right? The reason for this is because we actually had enterprise customers running on our VPN, and we wanted to make sure that, and they were not agreeing to a downtime. So that's why we needed to run a lot of rehearsals. And finally, also, we wanted to understand components that allowed rollback and those that did not. So things like DNS allowed us to roll back, whereby we can fall back from the GKE all the way back to the on-prem. And also, we know that the database would not allow us to move, allow us to roll back. So we had to roll forward with the database. So we took a precaution on that. And also, yeah, business constraints, right? So we realized that, you know, if we were given a chance to communicate more downtime to the customers, they would have agreed. But unfortunately, the end users who comprised of the enterprise users did not agree to it. They wanted it uptime all the time, right? And they had customers all around the world. And also another thing we wanted to make sure was that we wanted to strike a balance between the complexity of the approach and also the critical effects to the business. So yeah. So this is pretty much this is one part of the migration that we did. Initially, when we spin up GKE at that time, I think in 2017, we had to use Terraform. We resorted to use Terraform, and now we're actually using Deployment Manager, right? Go for Google. And So we still use Spinnaker, right, to provision the cluster, which was amazing. We did not use another new tool or inherit a new tool. So it was quite straightforward to spin up the cluster itself. The only pain point that came about for our migration is the database. So database is always the if anyone knows the cattle and the pet concept, right? Database is actually the cattle concept. Sorry, the pet concept, right? So you have to take care of your database, you have to make sure you nurture it and whatnot. The cattle side of it, you can just slaughter it and you just go on with it. You can have another cattle in another time. So with the SQL, it was quite tough. Then moving the application to the Kubernetes environment, we actually had to make an external replica on Cloud SQL, right? And thankfully enough, we did not need to do any kind of dump and restore, which means that if you do a dump and restore, you would have to shut down your database on one end and bring another one up in another end, and you have to have a downtime. Usually, a straightforward migration would include that, but we wanted to make sure that we were zero downtime. And then we actually waited for the replica to catch up to the master database. So we actually built a dashboard that showed whether the master and the replica were one-to-one matching in terms of data, right? And then finally, we promoted the replica to the new cluster, to the new master. This we kind of, I will talk a bit more on when we did the switch to master, from master to the other master, right? And primarily, whenever you do this, you always got to be concerned about what if something were to go wrong, right? And in this case, it was quite a huge effect. If something were to go wrong, how do we actually roll back? And I'll tell, like, how do we actually solve this later. And we decided to package our application in Helm. Some people have different ideas on how Helm would work, and some people would prefer another mechanism of packaging the app. In our case or scenario, we realized that we just wanted something simple, straightforward, fast, and quick. So we kind of just containerized, because our application was already containerized, and we were following the 12-factor app guideline. And I think there's a link there, but it's not showing. You can actually read more about 12 factors, building your application in that manner. And the only thing we needed to do to make sure that it was actually working on Kubernetes was that, hey, we just need to repackage it as a Helm chart and just deploy it using Spinnaker. Yet again, we kind of leverage on the right tool at the right time, and we can just reuse it, right? So this was how we actually did a zero downtime migration. We knew that our main component was actually the DNS, right? So we kind of had a separate domain with two different endpoints for the authentication to the application, right? So an old application was running on the on-prem, and a new application, I wouldn't say new, the same applications were running on on-prem and also on GKE, right? And the beautiful thing was that we still used the master database over on-prem, because we realized that the latency was still acceptable. Even though we did a round robin, which is reroute some traffics, we realized that when the application, or when the user authenticated the application on GKE, the application was still able to do checking of or validation of the user on the database on-prem, right? And this allowed us to perform tests on the cluster, right, while it was running, without actually interrupting any end users. And we were always constantly monitoring on latency, on 500 errors and whatnot. And then I think we ran that about a week before we realized that it's time to actually reroute some traffic. So we actually enabled a DNS round robin on this really cool service called NS1. NS1 has a lot of features, but we keep it simple, so we just use it for this DNS round robin, right? We can use anything else called Route 53, or I think Google has their own Google domain name servers, if I'm not wrong, right? And we just pointed it to two different endpoint connections. And then this actually allowed us to see how the new cluster behaved. How can we do scaling? How can we do downscaling and whatnot? And finally, right, once we were confident enough to know that, hey, users were authenticating, users were connecting to respective servers in that region, right, in GCP, we want to remove legacy DNS records so that all traffic flowed to the application on GCP. And we realized that clients with DNS cache, because whenever OpenVPN makes a connection to our VPN servers, the clients actually clip a DNS cache on their end, and we had to make sure that we had to keep that route up after the migration, right? And the beautiful thing is that because of that, because the ability to actually leverage on the DNS end, we were able to roll back if anything were to go wrong, right? So that's pretty much what we did on migration. And in terms of like, you know, the cost that we saved, we went all the way from 100 and, if I'm not wrong, 111,000 USD, all the way down to only, I think, about 10,053 USD, right? Yeah, just by, you know, being more efficient. And the time to provision was, I think this is something that we face internally in our company too. On our private cloud, we had to wait close to about 14 days before a new host is actually added to the server. And whenever we add a new server too, we had to provision them, right? And that added more time on our end. And we had to context switch from our day-to-day work to provision this so that our customers don't have any issues. But when we moved to GKE, I don't think you can even see the graph, right? It only took us 1 hour in 2018. That's because we were still on migrating all our servers across the regions. But right now, because of what we're doing on Google's global load balancing, it takes a little bit of time. It takes about 2 hours to actually set the whole thing up, right? So we went all the way from 15 days down to only about 2 hours. That's pretty cool. Sorry, yeah. So that's pretty much the migration. It's a very simple, straightforward, zero downtime migration. I would have loved to go in detail, but I did not know the audience today if they were interested in how the technical details went by. But if you're interested, you can come and see me after the talk and I can show you things. So in the future, what we want to do is we want to be able to leverage some things like Cluster API and KubeFed. Cluster API is pretty much a way to write your cluster definition and be able to run it anywhere in any provider without understanding the provider's API, right? It abstracts the whole thing declaratively. And this would actually allow us to scale programmatically according to business needs. I have a beta or POC version of this working, and the beautiful thing is that the moment the application knows that there's a load coming in, the application actually tells, is this working? Yeah. The application actually tells the cluster that, hey, I'm actually experiencing a lot of load, right? And we actually took advantage of Stackdriver, Google Stackdriver, which is a freaking amazing tool. And the moment Kubernetes cluster knows that the application is under load, it provisions more nodes on that region itself automatically by being self-aware. But it's still in beta. It's sometimes flaky here and there, but when you need it to work, it works. Another one more thing is that because we are managing different clusters in different, oh sorry, that's gonna hurt, sorry man. So come on, yeah. So the thing is that we were running multiple clusters across different regions. We wanted to find out if there was a way to actually manage all these clusters across the regions, right? So Kubernetes has this thing called KubeFed. It used to be called Kube Federation version 1, now it's version 2. And what this allows you to do is that it holistically allows you to control all your clusters via one cluster, right? You can actually tell like, hey, I know for a fact that I had added a new cluster through Cluster API in this region. I want you to add it to this pool. So your application will automatically know in one resident host what I need to do in that region. It's something that I'm still playing with. It's still not very well defined, but what this will help us do is that it will actually help us simplify the network using a thing called federated ingress. And Google actually offers this using global load balancing, right? And if I'm not wrong, the name of it is called IP mask. Yeah, that's something that skipped my mind. But what this allows us to do is that we don't need to be aware of the region. We don't need to be aware of where our cluster's running. Everything is taken care of by this one host running in one region, and it knows how to provision more. It knows how to remove stuff and everything, right? And yeah, so some of the things that I actually read along the way, I have more books if you're more interested, but one of the things that actually helped me was Kubernetes up and running. I understood how the underlying layer of Kubernetes actually worked, and I tried to leverage every now and then, and how can we improve, right? Another one more thing, if you're interested in how to do migrations from a managerial perspective, you can actually follow Will Larson's blog on migrations. He actually talks more about like when a migration is needed and how do you value a migration once it's done, right? And how do you prevent another migration from happening? So that's it from my experience on migrating my service from on-prem to GKE. Any questions?
So we have a few minutes for Q&A. So if you guys have any questions to ask?
Oh yes.
Now for the cluster API just now, right?
Yes.
How does it check? Right? Does it check every 5 minutes or?
Yep. So there is a reconciliation loop that constantly checks against a checked-in repository, right? You can actually define your entire cluster in there, and then Kubernetes API will have a reconciliation loop to tell you like, hey, is my cluster running accordingly and the same way what I defined? And if it's not, it will try to reapply it back, right? The only problem that I realized with that is that say you have a dynamic CRD that runs. CRD is a custom resource term definition, right? Kubernetes has these things where you can define something funnily and like it just brings up something according to your definition, custom. If you do that, Cluster API doesn't actually run correctly because Cluster API is not aware of CRDs that's in place. So it will try to override everything, and if you're depending on CRDs, say if you're running Istio that runs on CRDs and whatnot, it will override everything because that's a separately maintained entity, right? I will hope in the future when Cluster API is more mature, it would understand things like CRDs and whatnot that's available, and if there's a mechanism to automatically update CRDs into the repo, right? That's the goal, but yeah, it's not there yet.
All right. Any more questions?
Why do you guys use Terraform?
Oh, that's a very good question. So Ashrik, Ash and I always debate on this, right? So Terraform always has some issues whereby you need to make sure that you update your versions regularly. And whenever we had to do that, our what do you call, our definitions, when we try to apply them using Spinnaker, would break because we had to define and we had to upgrade our our version of Terraform. So when you made sure that your container that runs Terraform was updated, if your definitions were using an older version, and if a particular API was or a particular resource definition was failing, it will fail because of that, because of the update of the version. And we want to keep it deployment manager because deployment manager doesn't have that versioning in place. But I would say moving from Terraform to deployment manager is not something that you should be too concerned about. If it works for you, it's amazing. For us, it's just that we constantly ran into problems and we wanted to make sure that we use something that was more homegrown to GKE, yeah. Yeah, but Terraform is first class citizen supported by GCP, so you can still use it. Yeah.
Any more questions? No.
What time
Oh, yeah.
What time should we spin our own?
Okay, so I've personally done a lot of database, I would say, tuning, right? And I've always realized that whenever we try to run our databases in, say, a VM or in a container, which you shouldn't, unless you're Uber, but the reason why is that databases are very predominantly very write and read intensive, right? If you were to do it on a layer where you don't understand how these things work underneath, you're always going to run into issues such as how is the kernel invoking the read and write mechanisms. So you would always run into that kind of issues, right? And there's a lot more underneath that goes in, whereby how when your data scales, how do you actually tune whether a query that runs on a memory or runs on a disk, right? And if you would add more layers of abstraction whereby it runs in a VM, virtual machine, which is all cloud providers do, and then you run on a container, right? You're actually adding more layers, right? So it just slows things down. If you actually made a comparison one by one, unless Uber actually did a comparison on this and they were really close to how you would run a host on a DB on an actual host, like a machine, instead of a virtual machine, right? But I always say just leave it to the cloud providers because they know the best. It just removes that worry in your head, like, what do we need to do? But in saying that, I would say never trust something that comes out of the box, because there's always something that you can do to further improve the efficiency of the database, even though it's managed. Things like, how do you do your maintenance, upgrades, and your parameters that you define in your DB, everything plays a part. So, yeah.
All right.
Cool. Yep.
So, one more round of applause for Arvind. So, our next speaker is Wyhow. He's actually a data science manager at Media Group. So, what will he be talking about is actually building a chatbot with Dialogflow integration with BigQuery. Yep. Chatbot.
Let's try the quicker. I've never tried this on the laptop before. Oh, okay, good. Oh, because it's quick message work. Yeah.
Right. Wait for a while. By the way, anyone of you here is actually a designer?
Yeah. Where do I put this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, so when you add in the UI UX Meetup, there's a lot of developers there.
Okay. Then this? Pocket. Anyway, pocket lah. Phone I don't need lah. Yeah. Just
don't worry, oh, yeah. Sometimes it's actually just physical. Yeah. Cyber designer.
I think mine works. All right.
Sure.
Testing.
Right.
Hello.
Welcome. Yeah.
Testing. Hello. Yeah. Okay. Thank you everyone for coming. Spending your late night with us, and I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me to talk about Dialogflow. So, Dialogflow is basically a tool you use to build chatbots. It's actually quite simple to use. So what I'm going to talk about is how do you build a chatbot, where do you deploy it, how do you use Dialogflow, how do you connect it to external services like BigQuery, how do you test chatbots, and for my personal project, the one I'm doing in the STAR, what is next for chatbot development. So a bit of introduction. So I currently work in STAR Media Group. I'm a manager of the data science team there. I used to work in Invoke Malaysia. We did the predictive analytics for GE14. I was a senior consultant in EY. Before that, I was a lecturer at Taylor's College. So I studied in NUS. So my two main languages are R and Python. I do a bit of Julia, but that's not in use much in Malaysia yet. So I do a lot of cloud computing and predictive analytics. I don't do so much geospatial analysis nowadays. Yeah, so if you all want to ask me anything about chatbot development, just add me on LinkedIn, and I'll try and answer any queries you have. So first, how do you build a chatbot? So Dialogflow is basically an NLP engine. It sits inside GCP. So you throw it any questions. I want to buy a magazine, and I want to buy one magazine. So you just need to key in the intent for a magazine. Dialogflow actually understands a and one are the same. So you don't actually have to key in multiple permutations for one sentence. Now, for a chatbot, you want to be able to design it in a way that it answers several similar questions and give it one standard response. So Dialogflow is basically an NLP engine. It simplifies your work in a way that you don't have to key in multiple permutations for the same question. So we're not currently on the enterprise plan yet. We're still experimenting. So it's free up to 180 interactions per minute. So an example would be if I were to deploy it on Facebook Messenger. I can have 180 people per minute talking to it, and I still won't be charged. If I exceed the limit, I don't know what will happen because I haven't been there before. Yeah, as for how it works, the diagram is actually quite simple. My users will actually send in their queries using their phone or on their laptop. It talks to Facebook Messenger. It basically lies inside Facebook. Facebook Messenger will relay that message to Dialogflow. So Dialogflow will try and calculate what's the most appropriate response based on what you keyed inside the NLP engine, send back the response to Facebook Messenger, and the user can read it. It's actually quite simple. My only advice for people who want to develop their own chatbots, because the number of questions will actually increase by quite a lot as the project goes on, as you add in more features, as you add in more questions. I actually recommend you keep track of it using Google Sheets, just to see if any questions overlap with any other questions. Now, assuming that you have question 1, question 2, 3 to give answer 1, questions 10, 11, 12 to give answer 2. Now, if question 1 and question 12 sound similar, Dialogflow will get confused. It's very probable it will give the wrong response. So it's very important that you keep organized. You are familiar with what questions you put inside Dialogflow. Next, what platform is most suitable for deployment? Now, if you go into Dialogflow and you check out the list of integrations, Facebook Messenger is one of them. You can integrate it with Slack, Twitter, Telegram. I've only tested with Facebook Messenger and Telegram. So I made a bot to tell jokes. Yeah, that was it. So that was a cool thing to show off to my friends. As for what process you go through when you develop that chatbot. So this is basically the standard flow of any data science project. As for chatbot projects, if you're using Dialogflow, the technical challenge is actually quite minimal. Your challenge will be from the business side. How do you manage the stakeholders' expectations and so on? So the first step is actually to talk to people. What kind of processes do you want me to improve? Now, for those who studied primary school here, you will be familiar with a magazine called Kuntum, K-U-N-T-U-M. I actually developed a chatbot for that. You go to Majalah Kuntum's Facebook page, the chatbot's right there. So the chatbot, you not only have to teach it what questions you want answered, you have to develop some sort of persona for it. So Kuntum actually has, the entire series has a few characters. The persona behind that chatbot is actually a teacher. So if you go on Facebook Messenger, you call out teacher, it will respond. Yeah, so my purpose to develop this was to ease our customer service operations. So imagine if you have one person just sitting at a desk, 9-to-5 job, and her job is basically to answer questions that users have. And there's a very high chance with a high number of users, you're going to answer questions that are very, very similar across multiple users. Instead, why not just develop a chatbot that gives a standard response that responds almost immediately? So I did that just to make their job easier. And that goes with every data science project. You have to understand what's the business objective. Only then I will start my data science project. Next, building a list of intents and entities. So list of intent is basically a list of questions. List of entities. So let's say KUNTUM is basically a magazine. So you want to be able to group certain words that mean the same thing. But the problem is not all these words exist in the English language. For example, Kuntum, magazine, majalah. It goes across several languages. I can create a group of these words and label them all magazine. So anytime someone asks, I want to buy a magazine, I want to buy Kuntum, so Dialogflow will be able to understand they actually mean the same thing. Next, ensure no duplicate training phrases. So this is my question 1, question 12 example. If you put several questions that are similar across several intents, it will confuse Dialogflow. I noticed that that's actually a common mistake that most people make. Next, you integrate with your platform. So my experience, Telegram integration is one of the easiest. Facebook Messenger is also easy, but it is quite troublesome because you need to create a Facebook app, seek for app reviews from Facebook, and it actually takes 1 or 2 days. So you don't usually see immediately the results of your chatbot on Facebook Messenger. So on certain platforms, it may take a while to go online. On platforms like Telegram, it's almost immediate. Next, system test. So sometimes you want to link your chatbot to BigQuery. So for those who are unfamiliar, BigQuery is one of the services inside GCP. It basically hosts your data warehouse. Now, if you have, let's say, a table of customer IDs and subscription end dates, basically when their subscriptions expire, people can actually use that chatbot to check when is their last day of the magazine subscription. So if you have that in a table, you can link it up with Dialogflow. The trick is the code to do that took me about a day to figure out. That's the most difficult part. Next, deploy for public use. So I recently learned this myself. Developers will be familiar with this concept, V-testing. So I had to be able to recruit people, about 20 to 30, just to test how the chatbot works. Because it's possible that you develop the list of questions, but you're developing it based on your point of view. It's possible that people have other questions you may not have thought about and should be included in that chatbot. So that testing phase, I learned it the hard way. There are several phases to it, which I'll talk about later. Now, what are intents and entities? Okay, you go inside Dialogflow. This is the interface. So you can see berapa keluaran dalam setahun. Okay, on the record, Dialogflow actually supports English, but I figured out a way to make it understand Malay. Well, we have to cheat nowadays. So berapa keluaran dalam setahun. So Dialogflow doesn't really understand, but if it sees a question with like berapa keluaran setahun, it will be counted as similar. It will still give the correct response. You notice that some words are colored. Those are my entities. So if you see magazine, magazine is actually an entity highlighted yellow. Hey, cannot see. Okay. Yeah. So you can use entities as another cheat way across Dialogflow. You group words that mean that have similar meaning, and you don't have to compute. You don't have to key in too many permutations to make your job easier. As for integration with other platforms, it's right here. So you can link it up with Slack, Twitter, Telegram, and so on. Now, there's something called webhooks. This is actually quite new to me. Most companies that I talk to, when they develop chatbots, it takes them like minimum a year and like 6 figures of cash, like 300K, 200K. Dialogflow, I did it in 2 weeks. So it's actually quite quick for you to do this. Now, sorry. So, yeah. So this is what I call conversation flow. So the chatbot will start its conversation here. Hi, I'm Cikgu Arifah. How can I help you today? Now, if you notice certain Facebook Messenger conversations at the bottom, sometimes you can see conversation bubbles. Is it FAQ? Is it buy/subscribe? You can use those bubbles to create a guided conversation for your users. So you don't have to let your users guess what to say. You give them several options. One thing I like about this is that even though you give them 5 options, option 1 FAQ, option 2 buy subscribe, option 5 did not receive, even if they key in a response, which is not in here, as long as one of those questions is similar to one of these intents, the customer will jump from here to another intent. So it's not, let's say if he wants to go from introduction to how to pay for subscription, he doesn't have to go through the entire flow. As long as he asks a question, how do I pay? He will jump from the introduction all the way there. So it's not just a flat diagram. It's actually a 3-dimensional diagram. They can jump almost anywhere they want. Now, you will notice some of these flows are not linked to each other. So one example, you see the green boxes at the bottom right. So that's actually my integration with BigQuery. If customers want to find out their subscription date, expiry, they can actually ask, but it's not linked to the main conversation flow. The reason I did this is because I wanted to test BigQuery out first. This feature is actually quite new for me. So I wanted, and another problem is the Majalah Kunto Facebook page, number of conversations, not that many. I'm getting like 50 a month. If I really want to test this in a more robust manner, I would prefer like hundreds or thousands of conversations. From there, I can actually see where are the mistakes, what's the accuracy rate, and so on. Now, every response that the user, every question that the user asks, you can not only, you can actually store it somewhere. Dialogflow actually stores a history of every question the users ask. So there are two ways to get this. One is through Dialogflow itself. The other way is through Stackdriver. The Stackdriver method I'm not too familiar. I tried to get my data engineer to store it somehow and to extract it. The process didn't go so well. I don't know what went wrong yet. Okay, chatbot testing. So I actually just learned this 3 weeks ago. So in any data science project, there are several layers where you need to test. Now let's start from the bottom. So bottom for chatbots, I'll just key in my intents. I'll just key in my intents and entities. Not much coding work there. This is just a template for any data science project. Next, unit test. In Dialogflow, there's a way that you can test the chatbot without integrating it to other platforms. So you can use that as a way to test your response accuracy. Next, integration test. So let's say you integrate this with Facebook Messenger. You get a few users to talk to your chatbot on Facebook Messenger. Next, system test. Sometimes my chatbot is linked to BigQuery. So I'll tell my test users, why not you ask subscription expiry. I'll give you a list of numbers. You tell me which one gives you the correct response. So far, my tests on BigQuery, they've been giving so far all accurate responses. I do have a few weird questions. When are you visiting my school? Weird. Apparently, Kunto has roadshows, which I just found out. That's why it's important to talk to your business owners. Acceptance test. So acceptance test means you come up with a list of criteria. Not only asking questions, you ask your business owners, okay, for subscription, are all the answers correct? For payment mode, are all the answers correct? So basically, it's a more extensive test, but aimed at your business owners. So example, for Star Media Group, it will be the Kuntong team. So they would test it. And I also got a few teachers to test the chatbot. Some of them told me the chatbot is actually quite funny. Dialogflow has a small talk option. You go to Facebook Messenger now, and you go to Majalah Kuntong, right there, tell me a joke. The joke will come out. So it's a small talk option within Dialogflow. So that's a bonus. Next, further development. Okay, so the thing about chatbots is sometimes you want, your chatbot will encounter questions which it doesn't know how to answer, in which case you need to build some sort of trigger for it to alert human agents. Okay, this is the time for you to come in and take over the conversation. So these are the two features we're looking at. One is called handover protocol. There are two ways to do this. My chatbot is integrated with Facebook Messenger. Within Facebook, there's something called takeover protocol. I'm not too sure how it works yet. I'm still testing out. The second method, there is a custom implementation according to Google. It involves a Node.js server. Now, I only use Python and R. When people come up to me and say, you have to code JavaScript, I'll be like, no. Oh, no way. Second thing is integrate payment options. I got this example from a friend. Lemonade is actually a service based in the US. People can key in their property options. Is it single story? Is it double story? Does it have fire alarms, burglar alarms? It will go all the way until giving you quotations. It will allow you to make your payment within the chatbot. So that's something we are exploring within the Kunto Magazine chatbot. Because if this works, we're going to deploy this enterprise-wide. So that will come with another set of problems, not the coding part. I had to deal with so many other managers. I think that should be it. Yeah. So if you want to start your own chatbot project, I suggest go for quick wins. Like for my case, I didn't suggest building a chatbot for the Star newspaper or the Star Online, the Facebook page. I started with a small project first, just to demonstrate it works. That will give me the bargaining chips I need to ask for more time, more staff, more resources to deploy this enterprise-wide. Next, do explore and ask around. The Star happens to be one of the organizations that Google works with for the Google News initiative. So the advantage is anything that I don't know, I can immediately ask Google. The response tends to be quite fast. Next, research how others are using chatbot technology. So I went to AirAsia's site, checked out the chatbot. Yeah, not great. You go to AirAsia now, and you see the chatbot. The picture is so creepy. Lemonade's chatbot is a very good example of what the STAR's chatbot should be. Bus Uncle. So those of you who work in Singapore, those of you who study in Singapore, Bus Uncle is a very good chatbot. It tells you jokes. It tells you what time the bus will arrive. Tells you which bus service works at a particular bus stop. So these are the kind of examples which I'm looking at. Not AirAsia for now. Yeah. So I think that should cover my presentation. Yeah, I'm happy to take any questions.
I want to ask if you have any experience using the CIMB chatbot.
I'm a bit cautious when using CIMB services because a lot of slowdowns in your services nowadays. So I don't even dare to test chatbot. Do you work for CIMB?
No. I'm actually not really into chatbot.
Right.
But suddenly I saw my friend, he's not a techie, suddenly he is using the chatbot.
Okay.
And I was interested. But I think one of the strengths is there are a lot of guided, right? You see the bubble.
Yeah.
Because usually, even NLP is quite new, and if you type a full sentence, sometimes they don't understand. So usually people just use the bubbles to navigate around the chatbot, right?
Yeah. Because the way I designed the chatbot, I didn't want to constrain the user based on a certain predefined flow. I wanted him to have the option of being able to jump around several questions or intents. So that's how I designed mine.
Yeah. So, do you think having the option and the text is a good idea, or only the bubbles?
So I use a mixture. So other than the bubbles, I also use something called carousel display. So if you go online shopping and you say perfume, you can actually get a list of perfumes and which you can scroll horizontally. I think that's another good option. Yeah.
Do you think users that try to bypass everything and get to a human user?
So far, not yet. These aren't 20-year-olds I'm dealing with. These are parents. They haven't figured out a way to bypass my chatbot yet.
Another question. What about WhatsApp?
Okay, so if you go to Dialogflow's integration page, it cannot directly link up to WhatsApp yet. But according to the people I'm talking inside Google, there is a WhatsApp integration coming soon, but only for business accounts. And if you know the charges for that, it's actually quite astronomical.
How well is the support for multilingual, and if you support, does it support like just rojak and just throw everything in? Yes, English, Malay, and Chinese also sometimes in the same language, same sentence, what will happen?
So I saw something called a multi-language chatbot. Dialogflow has that option, but I haven't figured out what would happen if I triggered that button yet. But I tried with English. Short forms don't work well. Malay, there are a few ways to key it in, like berapa keluar dan setahun, which you've seen before. Other than that, I haven't tried it yet. And my keyboard doesn't, I don't understand Mandarin, so 我可以听不会讲. So my chatbot doesn't speak Mandarin yet. It's a bit weird. My name is Cikgu Arifah, but speaks Mandarin. I would love to see that happen in Malaysia Baru, but it's still quite rare.
Any more questions?
One more there. Wow, he said you know who to blast after this.
Have you tried to integrate other NLP libraries in Dialogflow?
So Dialogflow's, I haven't accessed Dialogflow's libraries. If you are familiar with AutoML, it's basically you don't know what algorithms are used behind the scenes. Okay, so I was given a very short timeline to develop this. I didn't want to get a heart attack while doing this, so I chose Dialogflow. That's why. So I don't know because I haven't explored that area yet. I just wanted to be able to get the fastest, to get the most amount of work done in the least time possible. Because I'm also learning a lot online. I'm a huge fan of Google's Quick Labs. So during work, if I have like spare 45 minutes, that's where I'll spend my time.
Any more questions?
Okay.
Right. So once again, thanks for your. Right. So that marks the end of our August meetup. And before you guys go, I want to once again thank you all of you for coming on a Thursday evening to get our organizers to like really tiring. So before you guys go, we would like you to actually submit your feedback to the survey. The QR code of this one.
Yep.
Yeah.
Do Shoutout first.
Two shout out. Okay, so we have like two different shout outs. Hiring shout out, so whoever is hiring developers, designers. No one's hiring? Hiring? Oh. All right. Well, shout out. Hiring.
Can I use that
Well,
link? My laptop off already. Yeah.
Hi, I'm from ServiceRocket. We are hiring software engineers, product managers, and engineering managers.
Thanks. Okay. So there's also like some shout outs to like other events as well. There's a lot of talks. I skipped the design one for this one. So yeah, there's like what other talks are there? Like, because that like JavaScript is over already, Junior Dev is also over. What else? Nothing really. Oh yeah. Oh, what is it?
Gus. There's someone in the audience talking to my chatbot now, speaking in Mandarin.
So if you're hosting a meetup, Rust meetup, in case you don't know, language is language developed by Mozilla, mainly for safety. And if you're interested, you can come to our meetup at September 11th, Wednesday.
Dangerous, oh. Oi.
You sure it's September 11th? Wait, what are you thinking? Yeah. Oh, yeah, study jams, right?
Hey guys, so I just talked about the study jam. Okay. So we just talked about the study jam. Someone said like, oh, this is awesome. Yeah, we all
Your events, your birthday party,
your phone number.
Going, committee member from Wyhow Malaysia. So if anybody is interested in Wyhow or me, we do something really nice. So you can go to our Facebook page, Wyhow Malaysia.
Photo where?
Workshop or something simple like taking coffee and complaining about
You want to take photo, right? Do you want to take outside?
Alright, so there's the QR code and the link. So please do provide us feedback because so that we can actually make it much more better in the upcoming future. So this is very, very important for us. Okay, so once again, thank you all. Thank you for eating our food. last thing, after you actually submit your feedback, we would like to take a group photo just in front of this Google. Is it big enough? Never mind, we'll try. So yeah, so after the feedback, then you guys can actually come outside for a photo. Thank you. And also have a great Friday. Today is Thursday, so I'm wishing you have a great Friday tomorrow.
Yeah, 3 days holiday.
Oh, 3 days holiday, You don't need to go to work for Monday, God damn. Okay. For 3 weeks. So, yeah, this is going outside. You submit already?
No. Just say thank you for coming.
No, because they are submitting. Oh, yeah, you take photo.
For the next time.
Tak apa lah. Bukan sini ya.
This need to. If you offer one, I'll take it.
This one, you can take it back. Souvenir. But this one cannot. This one cannot. This one very slowly. You want to take 我现在在拿一个
You want to pick or
individual Huh?
So what you have like nice picture.
Thank you.
Yeah, I know. Okay, cool. Thanks.
Do you have a slide?
Yeah, we'll send.
Yeah.
We'll send the site. All right.
Thanks, man. Thanks.
Right, follow. Just so you can go back home and rest.
are you going back soon?
Why?
Just asking.
What, 洋茶? You want 洋茶?
I want sleep.
Is it that bad?
What?
Is it that bad?
There? Working there?
Can we?
Would that really